very much. I don't think I ever saw you in cutoffs before. I can see you're having a real good time, and I want to welcome everyone here. What a marvelous turnout. What a testimony to rural water and your hard work and all the days you're away from home and traveling the state on circuit rider programs to really build a better Ohio and a better America. Welcome to the 9th District of Ohio. In the way that the state legislature drew it, they actually wanted to put it out in the lake. But under the law, you have to have land in a congressional district and some people. So what they did was, when they redistricted, as the Constitution requires, every 10 years, the district extends all the way west into Lucas County, comes through Toledo, and then comes along Lake Erie, through Ottawa County in Port Clinton, takes in the Lake Erie Islands, keeps going east, gets here to Huron and so forth, and keeps going to Lorain, Ohio, Vermilion, the city of Lorain, Avon Lake, Sheffield Lake, keeps going into Cuyahoga County, and to Bay Village and Rocky River, Lakewood, Berea, Brook Park, Parma, Cleveland, you name it. So I got this big umbrella that is over the south shore of Lake Erie. And as I say to many audiences, even many, many young people who don't really understand why geography is important, I'll say to you, welcome to the most sustainable place on earth. Nowhere in the world does this much fresh water meet this much arable land. There is no other place like it. Welcome to the cornucopia of the Great Lakes. This past weekend, we had, I can't even tell you how many, tens of thousands of birders. Did you run into any of them? Not the birds, the birders. Did you see them? You can recognize them. They all wear unusual hats. And they carry binoculars and all these devices to look at birds. And of course, we are the bald eagle capital of the Great Lakes. And when I was first elected, and this is a way of telling you that your work really matters, there were 2 pair of nesting eagles left on Lake Erie in the Ottawa Wildlife Refuge in our marshes in Ottawa County, which I've represented since the beginning of my career. And I want you to have confidence, because there's a lot of doubt sometimes about the way we govern. We've got all these petty fights in Washington. You see some of that. You probably get sick of it. I do too. And but if we just keep vigilant, I can tell you today in Ohio, in this region, we have over 300 pair of nesting eagles, the symbol of our country, the bald eagle, a magnificent bird. That was due to the fact that we as a country decided that we were going to change the way we live. That we were not going to allow pesticides, which were causing the baby eagles to be born with their beaks crossed, that DDT couldn't be just broadly spread everywhere, and other pesticides, that we were going to clean up Lake Erie and the fish and the fauna and all the creatures, including humans, that draw their sustenance from this lake. And we were going to change the way we live. And people argued about it. They got, all this commotion. I wasn't in Congress back then when the Clean Water Act was passed. Thank God we did. Because now you can be here and you can enjoy an environment that is being reborn. You can see it. You can see what's happening with the fish. You can see what's happening with the birds, and including with the humans. And clean water makes a difference. And we still have challenges with this lake. It's the shallowest of the Great Lakes, but it is the most abundant. And all along its shore, we really are a land of rivers. We're a lot like the Netherlands. The place where you're sitting is a sponge. It used to be lake bed. But underneath, we actually have underground rivers. We have big rivers like Cuyahoga. The Maumee River at the western end of my district is the largest river that flows into the Great Lakes. And then in between, other rivers, the Portage River, the Toussaint River, the Vermilion River, the Black River. You can go to Rocky River. You've probably heard of some of these places, right? And their origins don't start with the lake, but they end up in the lake. And so this is a river and lakes district. This is an incredible place to live. I don't know why God put me here, but I'm here, and I'm trying to do my part, and you are too. So I want to thank you for your work. I want to thank you for your understanding of how important water is to life, and that we live in this life bowl. Ohio is a great place to live. I know recently I've traveled to places like California in my work in Congress, and I witnessed reservoirs 3/4 empty, reservoirs that used to hold water. And I looked at the effort of our country in the last century to try to develop 17 states, Nevada, Arizona, as one of my friends from New York City who speaks Spanish reminds me, Arizona means arid. Okay. And California, all these big states, we witnessed ourselves, for those of us who lived in the last century and now this one, the development of the West. We're looking at the Colorado River now being drained. We're looking at the Ogallala Reservoir. When I was born, there were 146 million people in this country. Today there are 310 million. And as projected by 2050, we will have 500 million people in this country. The one thing we know, there's not going to be any more water. It is a finite resource. We can reprocess it, we can clean it, but it'll come back through rainfall. And we have a lot of salt water, and what makes us unique, we are at the step-off point here to the largest body of fresh water on the face of the earth. So we have something so precious here. And I know some of you hail from other parts of Ohio, and you're blessed with fresh water there too. You know how hard it is to keep it fresh, and sometimes when it isn't fresh, what it's like to try to help people exist in that kind of environment. But we know that this century will demand new thinking and new ways of handling a continent that is growing, but the water isn't growing. I met with one of my colleagues in the Senate recently, who is the top person on her committee, and I'm the top person in my party on my committee, Energy and Water, that Tom mentioned. And I said, in a nutshell, if I want to tell the people of Ohio what is happening in California, and this was Senator Feinstein, I said, Senator Feinstein, what would you say? She said, you can tell them we're becoming a desert state. Think about that. Think about that. 60 to 80% of our fruits and vegetables in this country come from there. And I've learned something in my life, and I will share it with you, because I didn't always have the position I have now in Congress, and I've had to learn about places in our country that I'd never traveled to. I began to understand something called the Bureau of Reclamation, which is a part of the Department of Interior. You think I talk about this today, but I am. But as I studied it more, and I saw what it's done, it's provided the financing mechanism for the water resources of the West, the 17 states I talked about, as well as the energy resources. And for 102 years, our country invested in the development of the West. We thought it was a good thing. I think it's proven to be a good action to provide the water and the power for the western third of the country. The question is, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer, what's the next 100 years going to be like? When there isn't enough snow melt, unless you can desalinate the Pacific, which is extraordinarily expensive, what's happening out west, as some of you might know, in places like Orange County, they are taking sewage, and they are treating it 3 times, and they're infusing it into the ground and bringing it up, and they're drinking it. There's all kinds of conservation measures being employed in the West. There are going to be big fights and bigger fights between who can draw the water down, and how much of the water will go to people, and how much of the water is going to go to crops. I flew over part of what's called the Delta, 1,000 miles of coastline. I'm thinking about my coastline here on Lake Erie and how hard it's been to get the money to protect the shoreline so this building and others don't erode into the lake, right? We've had our challenges here in the northern part of Ohio. But in California, something called the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers are keeping 1,000 miles of coastline diked so that the Pacific Ocean doesn't come into this delta area where so many of our fruits and vegetables come from. And the fresh water for farming comes from the snowmelt that comes through big irrigation canals. It's hard for us to imagine in this part of the country because we never benefited from that kind of subsidy. 102 years of subsidy in the West that have created these incredible systems. They're like aqueducts. They're modern-day aqueducts. But I, as a member of Congress from our region, can't find enough money to meet all the needs that you have. And I can't find enough funds to repair the combined sewer overflows that my mayors complain to me about all the time. I can't find enough money in our country's budget to take care of sewage treatment plants that are aging here in the north. And when I look at a map of where most of the combined sewer overflows exist in this country, they're all in, guess what? The region I represent and points east of here, because we were the first part of North America, the first part of the United States that was settled, and our systems are older, and we have to have reclamation here too, but we don't have a significant financing mechanism as does the West to deal with it. So as I look at how we finance what we do for water and for wastewater, I see our part of the country treated differently. And so matching monies that are required by the state, you fight for the revolving fund. If you saw the appropriations that go to the West on an annual basis, and the mechanisms that they set up over the years to finance water, and I encourage you to do it, you'll say to yourself, wow, country's not been pulling with the Midwest, hasn't been pulling with the Northeast quite as much, because those financing mechanisms that are so powerful have not been available to us. And I think one of our challenges down the road is going to have to be not just to fight for the funding of the state revolving funds, but to think about a structure to reclaim a part of the country that has the water, okay, and that has millions and millions of people. And it's a new day in America, a new century, new people, half a billion people that live in this country. We're going to have to find a way to serve that growing population. So that's one of the major thoughts I want to say here today. When you think about the way Ohio used to be, and some of you probably saw this, some of the production, like tomatoes that we used to have here, went west, didn't it? It went west. California. Our own uncle in the 1950s had to leave Ohio because he had a truck and he had to go work for Del Monte out there. What did he do for his whole life? He hauled produce, okay, out there. I remember visiting him and looking at the orchards and what was being done in California, all with irrigated water. And I saw what happened to Ohio. And I've said to myself, and as a member of the Energy and Water Committee, one of the projects I'm working on now is how do we restore some of the production to this part of America that has the water. And I think one of the ways we have to do that is we have to use science and we have to use technology. So for example, sitting right here in this region, just a few blocks away, the Greenhouse Grower of the Year, a couple years ago, was a man named Gus Corso from Sandusky. Anybody here from Sandusky know him? He's got a big greenhouse over there. Great guy, just a great family. So he's on the cover of Greenhouse magazine. And I kept thinking, Gus has got some big houses and they're expensive to keep and so forth. So one of the challenges I'm working on is how do we create in Ohio and for this part of America the most energy efficient, water efficient, growing system that is affordable. How do we take our knowledge of canopies and drip irrigation and the way that we power these houses, reduce the cost and increase the production? We brought Israeli scientists over here to meet with many of our growers. We're thinking about how to invent the future, and water is an extremely important part of that, but efficient water use. Because we know water scarcity will be a part of life as we move forward. Maybe not in our lifetimes, but it's coming. It's coming. And so we have to be prepared for that world, and we have to invent our way forward. You're all involved in water. You see things in the countryside I don't. Each of us has a different set of experiences. But I really believe Ohio's agricultural production platform is going to be transformed. Now with the natural gas discoveries over in Utica and Marcellus Shale, We're going to have something most other parts of America don't have. We're going to have cheap gas. And compared to other places, and all the derivatives that come off it. So how do we use that in agriculture? How do we use the power of the sun? You're in one of the solar capitals of the world. First solar was birthed here. The most important solar company in America wasn't born in California. It was born here in northern Ohio. And how do we embed solar chips in the canopies? Technologically, we can make a 7-layer rubber roof. How do we get solar chips in canopies that we use in agriculture and do it in a cost-effective way? We have the industrial might in a state like Ohio to roll things and make them very thin and durable against the wind. How can we restore production here for 4 seasons? This is, with climate change, which is going on globally, whether you want to believe it or not, those who are close to agriculture understand it better than anybody. I was with a honeybee keeper yesterday, and I said, "How'd you do?" He goes, "Well, I only lost half the hives this winter. Last year I lost most of them." He said, "Maybe I got a couple strong queens in there." I said, "Speak up for the women." I said, "Okay, I like that." The challenges you see every day out in rural Ohio and all across America. So we know something's changing in the environment. We're not completely certain all of its aspects, but we certainly understand dry reservoirs in California, and that something has to change. And we have something in abundance here, and you are all shepherds in trying to make sure that it's well managed. So I can't thank you enough for that. Now, I wanted to allow time for questions, but I wanted to say in the recent farm bill that was passed, and I am one of the Ohioans that voted for it in Congress. We had some Ohioans who voted against the farm bill. If you could explain to me how you can do that to the largest industry in your state, please do, because it is a mystery to me. And but I'm one of the people that voted for it because agriculture is national security. When you are unable to feed a population, revolutions happen. Right now we see Russia invade the neighboring nation of Ukraine. Pray for Ukraine. That country is the breadbasket of Europe, never allowed to develop. Very evil forces at work. But if you look at the endowment, go home, look at a map, see how big it is. When I first saw the soils of Ukraine, it took my breath away. 12 feet of loam. I've never seen soil like that in my life. Hitler understood its power. He hauled it back in boxcars, some of it, to Germany during the Nazi era. So we have to pay attention to a country that is struggling for its future, for feeding the world in this century and the next. The power of the land there is breathtaking. And the president of Russia understands that. So if you can control that country, you can control a lot about what happens in Europe. They're talking about energy. That's another aspect of what's going on there because Russia's gas lines move through Ukraine. That's true. But don't let your eye off agriculture in Ukraine. It is her future. She's been waiting to give it to the world for most of her adult life and never been allowed to do that. So we are trying to develop some exchanges with Ohio. Dr. Alan Lyons, maybe some of you know him from Ohio State University. He's gone over there, and other people from our state tried to make a difference since the independence of that country in 1991. But there's a lot that hangs in the balance with the resolution of that conflict. So anyway, in the recent farm bill, we tried to promote something called connectivity to support the work that you do so there can be fresh water in many corners of this state. But we also were interested in this challenge. And that is, if you look at the farm bill, about 2/3 of the money in the farm bill goes to nutrition programs. People who can't get enough food. Or there are problems. Poorest people in America, women over the age of 80. I've seen them in parts of the district that I represent. We've tried to spawned community gardens. We tried to grow food inside these nutrition-short regions. I've watched 80-year-old women pick peppers to the ground in their neighborhoods that were for free. We're trying to bring the growing sciences back into the city. There's need. There's need in many places. And the Farm Bill tries to help some of these families weather life, whatever life puts in their path that makes it difficult. A third of the Farm Bill is production. But over the years, the production knowledge has been held in the countryside. And so we have people who live in cities who, in my opinion, are not survivable. I'll get in trouble for saying that. But when my little neighbor, when I pull carrots out of the ground, and my little neighbor who's 8 years old takes it, runs into the house, and I can hear him say, "Mommy, Mommy, look!" It's like magic. I think, boy, we got a job to do in this country to show where food comes from and to let all children in America understand the power of the earth. So that third, we tried to provide in this Farm Bill greater connectivity so that, for instance, if you're producing cucumbers in the countryside or peppers or whatever, that you can bring those to a farmer's market in the city. Or you can bring it to a little retail store. Trying to provide funding in the Farm Bill to connect rural America to urban America. Also providing incentives so that people who live in some of these nutrition-short regions can grow some of their own, to partner with rural people who can help them advance their skills. Something like hoop houses. This is how many of you have, if I say hoop house, how many know what it is? Anybody know what a hoop house is? That's all? Just one person? Do you all know what a hoop house is? You know, those sort of curvilinear structures under which we grow woody plants and vegetables. If you're in the greenhouse business or you're in the nursery business. Well, most of my mayors have no idea, the urban mayors, no idea what a hoop house is. So if we try to put a hoop house in central Cleveland or Lorraine or Toledo, where there are poor communities, so they can grow their own food, we're running into trouble installing them because the mayors can't figure out what these things are. So anyway, so the Farm Bill tries to help to school up all of America so that we can do a better job of living together, all right? So the Farm Bill has a lot of goals, and I like that connectivity between rural and urban, helping rural people bring their product into farmers markets, helping people in communities that don't have food learn how to grow it, sharing some of those skills. So that's a little bit of a twist in this Farm Bill that's different than other bills. There are value-added programs that are there for producers in the countryside, including for renewable energy. We're having a lot more farmers showing interest in whether it's geothermal or wind turbines or solar or bringing up power from sources that are on farm. There are all those kinds of incentives in the bill. So I'm going to just end with this and say, I think you work in one of the most important capacities in our state and in our country, because you are very close to life. And you are at the beginning of it, because without water, nothing else survives. Nothing living survives. I thank you for your dedication to our state. I can't imagine what a day in your life is like. I bet you got a lot of stories you can tell, right? I hear a lot of giggles, yeah. And I bet you got a lot of satisfied customers. You got a few dissatisfied ones, right? You got the complainers out there. That's true in life, right? But you're constructive people. You really have made something happen in this state. We're a better state for your service. So I'm just very grateful for a few moments to address you today. I'm more than happy to take any questions you have about the Farm Bill, about Congress, about Ohio, about this region, which I love to talk about the most. But anything that, this is your moment. This is your moment. So, Tom, I'm going to put you in charge of the program at this point and just thank you so very much for being here. We will fight for water resources for your program, but please spend some time looking at how other parts of America fund water and infrastructure. You will see how truly underfunded we have been over the years because we simply didn't have a financing mechanism to match what exists in places like the Arid West or the Tennessee Valley Authority. where bonding over a number of years has made it much easier for them to finance the installation of the systems that you struggle so very hard to install. So thank you so very much, and I see a hand going up there, but I'll let Tom have you handle the question period here if you would, and I'm happy to be your servant, which I am. Thank you so very much for being here today. It's been a joy to speak with you.
Raised a hand over here? No? None? Bill? Bill Meese lives in Norwalk, Ohio. Okay? Yes.
I'd like to know if there's anything going on. At one time I heard that the western states were trying to get the Great Lakes water, and anything's happened with that?
The question is, he had heard in the past that the western states were trying to get Great Lakes water. Is anything happening on that? The answer is the Great Lakes governors have signed what's called a water compact that indicates their objection to any withdrawals that would be outside this region. But I'll be honest with you and say, and I support that. And I think each region has to take care of the resources of their region. But I think politically, the future is very uncertain. Because what's been happening because of the development of the West and South, our region has fewer votes in Congress. And the population here has remained stable. In other places, it's gone up, for example, and we don't have the votes. For instance, I think there would be a war. I'm just kind of, I don't know, but if the West tried to drain our water, but I also know that politics does strange, when scarcity happens, politics kicks in and some strange things can happen. And I think that we have to hope that our governors remain united. But for instance, we face the problem up here with the Asian carp coming into Lake Erie and the Great Lakes, right? And we can't get a decision to build a permanent barriers, whether it's Chicago or Muskingum River or the different places where we're afraid these fish are going to come up into Lake Erie because of politics, disagreements between people as to how to solve the problem. So there have been efforts to tap in to our freshwater resource by bottlers in Milwaukee, for example. And the Great Lakes is a system. I mean, it's interconnected. And so if you put a straw in one end and you start sucking it out, it does affect what happens in the other end. So I think it's unpredictable, sir. I think we're doing all we can, but I can also tell you this, and I've said this to many of my law schools that I represent. You better have lawyers and specialty centers in the law schools in this region on water law, because the West is so far ahead of us in water law. They've had so many cases. They've been adjudicating this for over a century. We are like little lambs. We are like little lambs. So we have to be very mindful that the country's changing. Nature's changing things. And the demography of the country is changing. We're going to have, 3-4 times as many people as when I was born. So a lot of things are going to happen with precious resources like water. And so, what's the old expression, liberty demands eternal vigilance? Well, retaining our fresh water demands eternal vigilance and people who will fight to maintain it here. But the honest truth is, what happens if some of these western states go completely dry? What's going on out there now is that they are, how many of you vacationed out there, you have family that's there, you go to a hotel and they say, reuse the towels. Don't shower after such and such, wait a couple of days. You drink the water down in Southern California. If any of you drank that water, have you drank the water? It's very saline. It's I don't really care for it myself. And when you think about bottled water, have any of you ever said to yourself, why are they bottling water? Did you ever say that? How many, go somewhere now and they put a bottle of water in front of you? That didn't come from our part of the country. Come out there. I mean, it was becoming more scarce. So they're bottling it and putting a price on it. So we see signs all around us of how things are changing because of the precious water resource. And so they're changing their way of life. They're raising their taxes. They're trying to invent new water systems. They can't figure out how to desalinate the Pacific because to build the power plants to do it is so expensive, they don't have the money to do it right now. I don't know what solution we're going to come to as a country. Right now, we are fortunate, and we need to be thinking about how to compete in agriculture by the technologies I talked about. We've had some farmers in this region adopt sub-irrigation on their fields so that you don't get as much evaporation. Ohio State's been working on this. A lot of our progressive farmers are doing this. They're taking, gosh, you could tell me a lot of things that they're doing to take better care of their operations here. One of the, I'll tell you, one of the real challenges we have here, this is my chance to influence you, and I want to influence you a little bit. I represent the largest watershed that flows into Lake Erie. Lake Erie is the most drawn upon of the lakes for fresh water. More people live around Lake Erie's borders in the United States and Canada than the other lakes. But it is the shallowest lake. It also drains the largest watershed. The watershed goes from here to Fort Wayne, Indiana, goes down to Findlay, Ohio, and it goes up into Michigan. It's it's the largest watershed in the Great Lakes. And we spent the last 15 years working with our farmers to try to explain to them and to the chemical companies, look, you're going to put all this stuff on the land for production purposes. When it rains, believe it or not, your farm practices influence Lake Erie's health. And we have been having gigantic algal blooms on Lake Erie. They're frightening, actually. And there are some toxic algae that are a part of that. A lake where we all draw our water from. So we have to figure out how to conduct agricultural activity in this largest watershed in the Great Lakes and not have the nutrient charging that occurs up the Maumee River. You can see it on satellites. It's very clear what's happening. And how do we keep those nutrients on the land? Nutrients are expensive. When you go to the store and you try to buy phosphorus or nitrogen or so forth. So we're working with farmers, with the Farm Bill, for example, to create on their farm, and maybe you can help us do this somehow through your work, where we would have retention ponds or wetlands right on farm, and they would save some of those nutrients on the farm rather than letting them wash down into the streams, rivers, lakes, ditches, out into the lake. They can reapply that to the land. You see some technologies now being developed here in northern Ohio. I try to get the weathermen and women on our channels, Channel 13, Channel, and all these channels up here. I said, look, would you do me a favor? Have a farm report as part of your weather report. And explain to the farmers, look, here's a map of the region. We can satellite map it and show where these rivers of nutrients are coming from through the ditches and out into the lake so the farmers understand that what they're doing on their property affects the water here. And one of the biggest accomplishments we've had over 15 years is farmers deep into Paulding County or Williams County or Mercer County going, oh, yeah. Or how about Fort Wayne, way over there, you know, that what they do impacts us here. This has been a real educational challenge for us and one that we haven't fully met yet because they don't see the connectivity. They don't see that what they do on their land, you know what they say, they probably say it to you, it's my land. Well, yeah, but your ditch goes somewhere else. And that water rolls off somewhere else and it causes this downstream. And so we've had our marinas along the lake. We've been taking farmers out on the water. We give them Dramamine. And they don't get seasick out there. But we wanted to see what these fishermen and these boat captains have to go through in order to try to take people out to the lake and fish. And this is the most abundant of the lakes. We have more fish in Lake Erie, more birds than all the other Great Lakes combined. This is a multi-billion-dollar fishery. I think the last number I saw was 7 billion or 12 billion, so it's big. And second largest number of boating licenses in the country here. So this is a life goal, and it is fragile. It is fragile. And so this is a real challenge for us with water and with agriculture, how we help our farmers. And in the Farm Bill, there's conservation provisions, believe me, all kinds of provisions in there for stream bank plantings, for conservation reserve, for under EQIP. I mean, there's all kinds of incentives in the Farm Bill to kind of help our farmers to do what's necessary to kind of keep that stuff on farm and to save the nutrients for reapplication, not let them just float out into the lake.
You mentioned appropriations. I was wondering where we can find that information, how much money it was.
Okay, where are you from, sir? You're Defiance, Ohio. I have a young man named Ryan Stayer who works for me from Defiance, Ohio. Really fine young man. He's in the Washington office, and he handles water. And for the agriculture bill you're asking about, right? The appropriations for the agriculture bill, it is not finished for this year. The Farm Bill passed after how many years of waiting? 5 years. I said, boy, when you can't pass a Farm Bill for a country, the most important export industry we have, we finally did it. You all helped on that, thanks a lot. But we finally got it done, so we're back in the driver's seat again. And now the next step is for the Appropriations Committee, on which I serve, and the Subcommittee on Agriculture to begin to divide the available funds among accounts. They've been holding hearings, they haven't made their decisions yet. So this is a perfect time for you to weigh in. I know on the rural water programs, the budgetary amount last year is about flat. I think it's a flat from what I saw anyway, in the Farm Bill and in the appropriation bill. But this is a time to be vigilant. You're talking to one of the right people. I'm not on the agriculture subcommittee anymore. I care about it a great deal, and we will try to weigh in and be very, very supportive. But the big thought I want to leave in your mind is when you go to your national meetings, have your people who are your policy experts take a look at what you have to deal with every day here in rural water and what the 17 states in the West have in terms of the Bureau of Reclamation. It's very different, very different. I won't go into all the details, but I'm just raising your consciousness of, there's different places to fight, different ways to fight, and this is one that you should become conscious of for the freshwater region of the Great Lakes. You would think that we would have like a real umbrella over the Great Lakes that we would take very good care of. And to give you one example, we have something called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We bring in about $275 million a year to try to help all these issues we have on the Great Lakes. Every year, the 17 western states get $1.1 billion. They're water short, and that's only scratching the surface of what they get because of the way their programs are structured. So we're not even in the same ballgame, and yet we have pretty. So we have some changing to do. In the new WRDA bill, the Water Resource Development Act, one of the accomplishments of a woman from Michigan, a Republican named Candace Miller, she and I worked together. I'm on the other side of the aisle, but she was able to get the Great Lakes designated as a system, not just individual ports, but a system in the WRDA bill. That is really important for us. It's a way, we're not just little pieces of a puzzle. We are a system. And we need to be treated like a system, a freshwater system for this country. So that's a step forward. That's a really good thing. Another thing that's happened for us that's really good for the first time in 3 decades, the president appointed an individual from Ohio to head something called the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. Her name is Betty Sutton. She was from Akron, Ohio, former Congresswoman. She is working so hard. And I said to the president, and I said to the vice president, do you realize for the first time in 30 years, you've appointed someone that actually comes from the area? They always appointed the competition. People from Galveston, Virginia, New York, San Diego. When I used to see these appointments, I'd go, unbelievable. We get no help. Now we finally have someone who comes from our region and is working for us. So there's a lot of things that go into protecting the Great Lakes. Those are 2 elements, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the appointment to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation that are good for us.
Any other questions?
Did I talk about anything you were interested in?
No.
All right, very good. Okay, thank you so very much.